Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 485 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today on the show, I'm talking with Bryan Hopkins. You probably know him from his exquisite porcelain vessels, but you might not have guessed that some of those are made from low-fire porcelain. In this interview, we talk about formulating translucent porcelains at low-fire temperatures and how he uses a neodymium grate magnet to create speck-free clay bodies. To see examples of his work, you can find him on Instagram, or you can check out hopkinspottery.com. Before I get to this week's interview, I did want to mention that I will be at the New Clay Conference October the 20th through the 22nd in Ottawa, Ontario. I'm happy to be going north to present with Marina Lesperance Lopez, Zoe Pinnell, and Martina Lanton. If you're interested in coming to that conference, you can register right up until the conference. There's also a scholarship that's being offered by Make and Do, which has a deadline of October the 6th. If you're interested in applying for that scholarship, you can check that out at the Make and Do Instagram page or their website, which is makeanddo.ca. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. Well, how did you get started on the low-fire porcelain idea?
The idea came from a necessity. So at one point, I had been using only Southern Ice porcelain. It was being imported into this country by a big clay company, and all of a sudden, they just shut down importing it. And so nobody else was importing it at the time. I needed to develop a clay body. So I was thinking, well, okay, I can do it. And I developed the cone 10 body, but then I was thinking, well, how could I make this more efficient for myself? So then I developed the cone 6 translucent body. Then I thought, well, wow, if I can do this at cone 6, how low can I actually go? I started doing a lot of research on different, like a low fire translucent body. And there have been some recipes out there, but they're published in books, and nobody ever mixed them. It must have been that, nobody ever mixed the recipe, or otherwise they'd see this is like some brown opaque clay. So I found something in looking at Turkish ceramics called frit clay. And so I was looking into that. I just started doing experiments on my own, based on my going into it really naively, thinking, oh, frit clay. So frit plus clay, 50-50. And just, I started with New Zealand kaolin, because it's the whitest burning clay. I'd already been using that for years. And I just started mixing that with all the frits that I could, 50-50. And then finding the whitest plasticizer, just with burn tests, basically firing the whatever materials I wanted to use up to cone 05 and seeing what actually burned really white. And that's how I came to V-gum as my plasticizer, that or macaloid. They're both pretty white. And then also the other component of it was I set really strict parameters for myself, because I can do cone 6 and cone 10 translucent. It's nice and whiter in reduction, of course, but you're still firing it that hot, and you're still using all that energy. So, and at my house, we pay extra to have all our electricity provided with solar and with wind. So. And you pay a premium for that, of course. But I was thinking, wow, if I could fire my kiln to 05 And how efficient would that be? And I'm running off of, in theory, right? It's coming off of nuclear still, but in theory, that company is getting the money, right? To do, and in practice, you could actually get solar, you could get all that energy clean. So I'm just trying to lower my carbon footprint. I found it important to do that. And then the other parameter I set for myself was that I wanted it to be then single fire. So a self-glazing body as well, fully vitrified, self-glazing, and translucent were my parameters. So I went off that and did hundreds of, maybe about 200. I think I did about 200 separate recipes. And honestly, the first one, that 50/50, is still the one I go back to because it works.
And remind me which frit you decided worked the best with that New Zealand Kalen?
Well, I'm using 3124 now. I was using 3195, but they changed the formulation of it. And now it fires to this weird, like pinkish color. And I just thought Fritz were more of a scientific thing, and that would be super steady. And it's and it's not. So that's where I don't know if they're in my mind they're getting all the sand to make the frit from like the pink Bahama beaches, which is this really nice romantic picture in my mind, which is of course not true. But
Well, when I think about this idea of making a translucent low fire body, it's one of those things that people say, like if you talk to a cone 10 potter, they might say, nah, that's not going to work. But you literally are a cone 10. I mean, your porcelain work is hotter than that even, right?
Yeah, just 11, but yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting to me that in a way you took kind of a central problem in ceramics and solved it by not thinking that it's not possible.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think that that's what I want people to get out of this book is just the idea that like with enough research, you can figure anything out. It might not look like what your original idea was, but you can figure out something that has the parameters that you're interested in.
Definitely. And people, and after I developed the body, I was really forthcoming with information about the process of my research. I wasn't telling people exactly what I was putting in it because I wasn't ready to do that yet. It is like your kid; it's not ready to go out into the woods by itself and play. So I didn't want people to do that. But then I did give it to some people to try in their own kilns. So I gave the recipe to Justin Rawshank. He did some stuff at the back end of his soda kiln, which was really cool, using EPK. He was using EPK. And yeah, and I had a lot of people asking me, a lot of people wanted me to make it and sell it. But it's not that kind of clay. It is more of a small batch clay to me, and it just because it costs a good amount of money, but it takes to staining really well. Like you only need like 3% mason stain to get that actual to get the color that they advertise too. It's really neat. It's really neat when you start to apply this. But as far as the experimentation goes, people it's like a kid in art class being told no, or you can't do that. So then somebody's one time told a potter kid that they couldn't do something and they believed them because that person is like this authority figure or just, on a pedestal for that student. Or else somebody says, well, that's not really porcelain, which, I would, and I have challenged that thought too. Like, well, what do you think porcelain is? where did you find that definition?
Well, also if it's 50% New Zealand kaolin, that literally is porcelain. I mean, that is
Yeah.
a super white kaolin.
I've always called it low fire porcelain. And a couple of people have said, oh, well, that's really an earthenware because of the temperature it's fired to. I said, oh, well, okay. So how about, what's in your clay body? what's in your porcelain that you use? Oh, I said, is there any ball clay? Oh yeah, well, you use ball clay to get more elasticity out of it. Well, then it's not porcelain. You're putting fucking ball clay. Like, by definition, you need to be using like kaolin from fucking Mount Kaolin,
Yeah.
Patons, and whatever else. Like, go find that, and then tell me who's using porcelain. Oh gosh, people just get so puritanical about things. It's hilarious to me.
In terms of the workability of the way you have used it in actual pots, how does it compare workability wise to your Cone 11 porcelain or Cone 6 even?
I haven't really found any specific limitations. It doesn't cast as well, just given the makeup of it, but I haven't pushed that either. I haven't really gone into that to figure out how to cast it better. But I can throw it just as tall. And that's another thing. Like, they always think, well, you need more than 2 ingredients in something for it to work. You hear that about glazes all the time, which is just, depends what 2 ingredients they are, right? Like, because Cornwall stone is 1 ingredient, but it's also like 3 ingredients. So when you just kind of look around and you look at the scientific breakdown of everything, then you can get to interesting places. And I've been told, like, oh, well, New Zealand kaolin is so short, you can't really throw thin with it. Like, I just mixed samples this week. I mixed them Wednesday morning into a really liquid. I dried it out on plaster and I threw it translucent, like 4-inch cylinders, in the afternoon. No problem. No cracking. Is it better when it ages? Yeah, a little bit. But again, it's that thing somebody put in the back of everybody's head when they're a student, like, oh, you need to let your clay age. Oh, you need more ingredients, or New Zealand kaolin is short. It doesn't throw well. Like, I've been using this stuff for like 15 years now. It's perfect. It's like the perfect material practically. Anyway.
Well, one thing you said, I think, that really determines plasticity is that you start from a slip and then dry it back out. I mean, ironically, a lot of commercial clay mixers, to save time, are doing water to powder and, in a circular mixer, and that inherently doesn't make the most plastic version. So even commercial clays that aren't that plastic, if they were filter pressed or, like you said, mixed in a small batch from slip, they would be way more plastic. I found that with my red terracotta for sure.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, no, I started doing that. Why did I start doing it? Because I knew about filter pressing. Because I knew that Southern Ice was filter pressed. So I investigated what that was. I saw those really cool, machines. And it just makes sense, right? To saturate all your particulate. And then, and I don't know if you know this, but New Zealand kaolin, when Emery's took over, they stopped refining it so much. So it comes lumpy now. And it's a real pain in the ass. So you kind of, I add my kaolin to the water and mix that into a slurry just to make sure it all does. Even when I mix my Cone 10 stuff, I'm mixing it that way. Otherwise, it doesn't get saturated. You get these like ultra white specks and things, and it's awful. It's awful. But Emery's, you can't control what these people do. These people.
Well, let's go back to the colorant idea. So you said at about 3%, you get a really nice color response, which I think that body stains at Cone 10, I've seen like 10% as the amount. So you're really saving a lot in terms of financial cost by saving those colorants. How else, though, do you think the colorants affect that body? Like, is it any different than any other clay you've used?
Yeah. So when you add the colorants, as opposed to just using it without the colorants, it shrinks more. Yeah. So then I do use one of the O5 bodies with a different, with less shrinkage to make, like when I stain it black, especially, it shrinks a lot more. And I always am joining the white to the black. So, but if I just mix in, if I use half Growlig and half New Zealand kale, and it's about the same shrinkage rate. So I can compensate that way. Um, but that's about it. It doesn't affect the firing temperature that much, if at all, maybe a half a cone, but I haven't investigated it that deeply.
Yeah, and in terms of cones, you said '05 was your starting range. Di like, talk to me about, like, at '08, is it not self-glazed, and then at '05 it is, and at '03 it melts, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what's the
Yeah.
range of how it works?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So to get the best results, what I do is I fire it, and I always recommend this. You need to know what your kiln is actually firing to. So you need to use witness cones, even in an electric kiln. That's just what people do, who care about precision. Anyway, um, so what I found through trial and error was that cone '05 on a fast cycle, and then holding it for 15 minutes. So the shelf actually heats up because it's so sensitive to temperature. If you don't do that, the rim of the piece will be fluxed and the bottom will be like an orange peel, which is kind of a nice effect. Potters love that because they understand that. It's like, oh, did you salt fire this? No, no, it's just cold. and and I have, I've posted or I published a few pictures of like some of the fails, opening up the kiln and just have pots collapse completely. It's not what you want to have happen, but it's a learning experience. You too much frit or too high a temperature, usually is what it was. Yeah, yeah, but the temperature is very picky with temperature. You can adjust. I made it adjustable glazes, when I was looking at Tony Hance's '03. He makes it '03, but it's still porous at '03. But he makes that so people can glaze it because people want to glaze, right? So he needed a glazable body. But I've tried, I've done that. I've made that body, so I kind of know how to do that. And he publishes his recipes too, so people can always get into that.
One of the things I'm interested in is, and I'm going to do some tests with your body, is the idea of an actual vitreous slip at low fire. Because a lot of times I'll see vitreous slips and they're really more for sculptural applications, like they're not actual vitreous slips. They're more, I don't know what their porosity would be, but there's some porosity. So I like the idea of trying to use this on the outside of a terracotta. And I have a feeling it'll have to be adjusted for fit issues because the terracotta, it's like it might shiver off of the pots because the terracotta's shrinking and expanding is different than that. But it seems like it could be promising if it takes color to have a quote unquote raw surface at low fire.
Yeah, and I've done that. I've attached it like, leather hard to leather hard. And then the low fire porcelain definitely shrinks a lot more. there's there's a good amount of shrinkage to it. Yeah, and I'd be interested to see that, Ben. That's gonna be really cool.
Yeah, because that's the main reason I see low fire people going to cone six is that they need to have they want to
Oh,
have raw surfaces, but they can't. They need that porosity to be low enough that you're not going to have absorption issues like when you're using the pots.
right. Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about that.
And I'm also interested in how materials change over time. Like you mentioned, 3195, the frit is changed over time, and Val Cushing did tons of experiments, or his students helped him, back in the day. But a lot of times I'll read those recipes and it's kalins that we don't get or differing things. It doesn't mean you can't do the testing, but it's just interesting how the literal raw materials change every 15 years or so.
Yeah, it's frustrating. It's I have tests now with my cone 10 and cone 6 bodies, excuse me, using Nefsci and Custer, because I'm done. I'm like done with Minspar and the scumming problem. I add some talc to my Cone 6 body to get rid of some of that scumming, and it gets rid of most of it. But I really just don't like it. But when G200 stopped, that was just awful. It's like, oh my God, what, what? So I and then my the woman I have the studio potter apprenticeship
apprenticeship.
grant
Yep.
with, she just ordered some Nefsci from Sheffield, and I think she ordered some of the stuff that Tony gets up in Canada. And he had always been saying that I should try some of that. I should be replacing Nefsci with any sort of using that for my feldspar as I go to Cone 6. And I just never did it. I was lazy or something, and I couldn't get it actually. 15 years ago, I couldn't get it, but I think now she just did. And that's and like I said, with the New Zealand Kalen, it was just so frustrating to open that bag one day. Well, I saw that the marking was different on the outside. It just says ultra fine. It used to say like ultra fine H. And so like the demarcation was different, and it's because it's a level of refinement. So you literally get lumpy clay or lumpy dry clay, which is just, to me, it would have normally meant it got wet somewhere along the way, but that's just the way it comes now. And which is frustrating.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Hi, I'm Kara, content creator and Facebook wrangler for Amico Brent, bringing you ideas and support for your creative adventures every day. This week's episode is brought to you by Amico Brent. Find your favorite Amico glaze at your local distributor. Happy glazing!
Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfeld Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online resource for research and inspiration, featuring photos of thousands of objects made by over 800 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfeldcollection.com. So what do you think the potential of working at the different temperature ranges is for you? Like, has it changed your creativity any because you're really working at the whole ceramic spectrum of temperature?
Yeah, I mean, I focus on Cone 10 still, but the potential is that, I eventually am going to want my studio at my house, and I can't have a gas kiln at my house. We're not, I will never, you need to have a industrial zoning to have a gas kiln in the city limits in Buffalo. I'll never have that. I can't even get commercial. We live in a residential area, of course. So part of it is just knowing I'm going to have to adapt everything at some point. And I want to get the colors that I want when I do that. So if I can do that now, I'm not like putting off orders for cups and things because I'm experimenting. I'm trying to get the experimentation in now. Not that I'll stop, because I do love it. It's like it adds a lot. But it was experimenting, Ben. Honestly, I should have probably really went for a tenure track teaching job, so I could have like minions, mixing tests for me every day. Would have been a lot easier, and saved me a lot of time personally. But I think, the potential for it for me is just that it'll be going to full electric, just to get away from the gas.
Yeah, and that makes sense, because once you're home too, if you guys did go solar panels, you could have a completely green. I guess your materials wouldn't be coming from green energy, but your end of the production process would be all solar, which that's something I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think it's huge. The downside is New Zealand kaolin comes from New Zealand.
Right.
And I think it's refined in Australia.
Okay.
Maybe. I don't know. I never researched the path it took, but I do know it comes to the West Coast and then gets trucked out, to Laguna's different locations, out to my distributor, and then out to me. So it's a lot. There's a lot there, and but there's another source. There's another source. I mean, do you know the Dragonite mine in Utah? Okay, so I found there is a domestic source of halloysite, and it's in Utah. It's owned by a company called like Allied Materials or Allied Chemicals, and the product is called Dragonite, and you can search for it, and it's there. You just can't buy it. Like they've been sending me samples. Well, 12 years ago, they sent me a lot of samples, but it wasn't refined enough. Recently, the new owner started sending me samples for me to play around with, and I got it. So it just about works exactly the same, but again, it's not the same. It's not the same exact vein as what surfaces in New Zealand. So it's a little bit dirtier, but they do sell it. There's a tile company, big tile company on the West Coast, and they use I forget what he told me, 2.5 tons a month. Wow. Is what they go through. Yeah. So they found the use for it. But it's like making it commercially viable to sell to little people like us who aren't going through that much. So there is that other source, and that's what, and that when I was going after it big time, that's what I really wanted to buy. But I can't afford to buy 2,000 pounds of that at this, and I don't know the storage area either.
Yeah,
for
right.
A pallet,
where would you put it?
Pallet of it. So I'm trying to convince Alfred, James down at Alfred, he should buy like a super sack of it, so I can just go, dip into it a few times a year. But I have that neodymium grate magnet that I pass all the materials through that gets out most everything. So it is. I can see how dirty it is. I can literally see it.
Can you talk about how that works, that process of using the magnet?
Yeah, the neodymium grate magnet is what most clay companies have, that they pass all their porcelains through. And dry powder is what I mean. Now, I don't know. I think they pass it. I know Standard, when they're mixing, they pass every ingredient through their grate magnet. And that's how they don't get a lot of specking. But it takes out, it takes out all those like micro impurities, especially in reduction. Every one of those little bits is going to turn into a spot. And I don't do that. I don't do spots. If there's a spot, it usually gets destroyed or given away. So the grate magnet for me is essential. And especially like certain silicas, like short mountain silica burns really white, but it has specking to it. So I can use that and I can get out all that specking with that magnet. Then I have this really nice white that High Water uses for Helios, if you know Helios. If you're getting used to your East Coast clays yet, Ben, you getting used to them?
I am.
So the grate magnet is something that I recommend, and a bunch of people I know have bought them off of my recommendation.
And how does it physically work? Like do you like almost like sift it through something and the magnet is above it? Or how does that work?
So I made like a V-shaped hopper that will, it's about maybe 18 inches tall, and then maybe I think it's 18 by 18 by 18, but it comes down in a V like that. The magnet sits right in the bottom. So everything has to pass through those bars. And there's how strong neodymium magnets are. Well, this is 3 bars they're each 6 inches long, and each bar is internally loaded with a whole stack of magnets that are 1-inch magnets. So not a lot gets past it. Not a lot gets past it. Yeah. And so I do. I dump it in there. And I'll usually, because I'm, kind of neurotic about things, I'll pass it through twice just to make sure, But yeah, it's pretty easy. It is a big investment for people to make. It's not, it doesn't cost what a potter's wheel costs, but it's half as much as what a, a CXC costs. So it's one of those things that, and that's the other thing, like people invest, they don't want to invest in certain parts of their studios. I don't understand, like accurate scales. Like you need, like I have a scale that goes down to 100th of a gram, and I also have the big ass postal scale. But like people spend $1,500 on a potter's wheel and $5,000 on a kiln. But when I talk to them about like a $700 grate magnet or an oxygen probe for a gas kiln, it's like, oh, well, those things cost a lot. How much does a load of your work cost? Like, because I lost a lot of loads of Celadons because I didn't know what the atmosphere was like. And I have not lost any since I bought that thing. So, it depends where people want to put their money. Sometimes it's foolishly spent, is it penny wise?
Oh yeah.
Pennywise dollar. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Whatever that saying is.
Yeah.
What's I think about, just made me think about Blau kilns with the OxyProbe because of their computer system. They're really, and this is not just them, like other gas kilns that have moved to a computerized methodology, they really need the OxyProbe. So I wonder if OxyProbes will become more common as more people depend on computer software for gas.
I think they have to, because otherwise you're not gauging how they're actually working. Yeah, because I think Guile makes one, right? And Bailey, I know, just came out with one. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Talk about running a kiln efficiently, and that's another one of those other myths, like, oh, you're not in reduction unless there's smoke coming out. Like, well, no, that's not true. That's just another myth. Get an oxygen probe. I'm in super heavy reduction and there's no black smoke coming out of anywhere. You look at my kiln, there's not like, people have those tracings up the bricks. There's none of that. It's pure white on the outside and it's fire bricks. So yeah, oxygen probes are essential. I fired some of the low fire porcelain in a Blau in reduction, because I always, you always think, oh, reduction is going to be whiter no matter what temperature. No, it's not. It turned like gray. Like it absorbed way too much. And I didn't have, I was only at this place for a week, so I didn't have time for them to do multiple firings. Although those kilns are magical, aren't they? Holy cow! Oh my god!
And so efficient. Like when I was talking to Jeff, the guy from Blau, he was explaining like the compressed fiber fracs exterior, which is or interior of the kiln, but exterior walls, that those are 80% more efficient than a brick. And I was like, 80%? Like, what? That's crazy. But it makes sense, because that when you get really, really, really large scale kilns, efficiency matters, because even 10% off a factory is going to be, that might be their profit margin. So a lot of times I feel like factories are figuring this stuff out faster than we are because they have to.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We'll always be behind in everything, just because and some of it is like, it takes money to make money. So they can invest in things like that. Like, compressing insulation material is counterintuitive, because if you do that for any other insulation material, it kills your R value. So, for somebody to actually think, oh, well, if I compress it, it makes it denser and it's going to be more reflective then. And then they're going to put some coating on that too, probably, right? So, yeah, but again, it's one of those things, like, you have to do the things that seem counterintuitive sometimes. And then there's a big downside to what they do if that goes wrong at Cone 10. But with like an 05 body, what's the downside? You fire something in a little bowl. If it turns into a puddle, it's a puddle in a bowl.
Right.
There's no downside. more and more people are getting into the low fire stuff. I was thinking like there's other people like Andrew Snyder, who's at Westchester University. He's another one of those guys who went in, like he took some of the stuff that I was, floating around the internet, and I'm friends with him. And he, but he's done a lot. He's done a lot too with low fire stuff, but he came to the same recipe conclusions I did, workability and all that based on workability.
Well, thanks, man. This has been great. I really appreciate the time.
Sure, Ben. Yeah, it's always good to talk, clay nerd stuff. So
Definitely.
Thank you, man.
I'd like to thank Bryan for coming on the show. It was a pleasure to chat with him, and I appreciate him sharing his research into low-fire porcelain. He will be one of the artists that's featured in my upcoming book on low-fire ceramics, so look for more of these interviews throughout the next year, leading up to the publication in fall of 2024. Before we go, I'd like to thank today's sponsors. That's Amico Brent, the Archie Bray Foundation, and the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. If you or your organization would be interested in sponsoring an episode of this show or any of the other ones on our network, you can get in touch through our website. That's brickyardnetwork.org. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.
This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.